Alright, so I'm here today to show you how to create this cool looking hologram emerging from a watch effect, which you've already kind of seen. So I'm just going to talk to you about how to create it. We're going to get straight into it. So as you can see here, as I've built this composition out, I've pre-composed two scenes. Scene one, should I say, is the first scene here of the sort of over the shoulder shot of the watch, and the second scene is the medium close-up, which is kind of a low angle looking up at the character who's looking at their hologram. Now I just want to kind of start this off and explain that this is the most basic way of creating a hologram, the most classic way, shall we say, of hologram that you could think of, and this isn't necessarily the fanciest or the most kind of current way to create holograms. In fact, a lot of the time now, especially if you think of like the Avengers with the Infinity Gauntlet, nowadays it's not too uncommon to have things swirling around the wrist or graphics swirling in front or on top of the watch in 3D. Like, this is very much a hologram from Star Wars kind of aesthetic that I went for here. So that I'm not kind of boring myself to death recreating the exact same scene over and over again, I'm going to show you something different in this tutorial to keep everything fresh. So I'm just going to exit out of these compositions and create a new composition. The first thing I'm going to sort of say before you start this scene, before you actually get any footage into the scene, one thing I like to do is actually create a new composition which is just of the graphics of the thing that we're going to be creating. So I'm going to create a new composition and call it hologram. You can do the same if you want. I was actually working with 4K footage, but I did this on a 1080p timeline because my computer is pretty slow, and it's going to be even more slow when I'm doing two things, as in screen recording and all the rest of it. So I'm actually going to knock this down to 720. You can keep yours if you've got a decent spec computer. By all means, keep this at 1080 or 4K, depending on your machine. But I'm going to play it safe, go down to 720 to do my graphic, and 25 frames is fine, 10 seconds is fine, and my background colour is fine. Now, while I've created this, I want you to ignore all of this stuff up here, except for the two video clips, which we'll get into later on. And to start with, I can just make this fit the screen by changing this percent to fit. First things first, so that my computer doesn't die, again, I'm just keeping this at adaptive resolution. If your computer's super slow, you can also change this to fast draft, but I'm just going to see how this gets on, and I'm going to hit save before I go any further. I haven't actually saved this tutorial. Wow. Okay, watch VFX. Save this to my desktop. Watch VFX. Save. Also recommend you get into saving very, very regularly. Okay, so the first part of this tutorial is really building up the graphic, which that'll be part one. Part two is when you import the footage, do your 3D tracking or 2D tracking, and lastly is kind of finishing off the VFX. This could take a lot longer than I want, so I'm going to try to go through it as quick as possible and even skip some steps to bring in stuff that I made earlier, which is where you could go wild and bulk out whatever it is you're creating. So first things first, I'm going to be creating all my shapes now in the solids. The reason I'm going to be doing this is you could do this using the shape tool, but I want to kind of feather edges and that kind of stuff, and so creating solids is the best way I find to do this. So the first solid, I'm also going to make my solids white on a black background, and that's because I can change the colour, or you can change the colour of white solids later on. And I'm just going to call this something like circle. So earlier on you saw me, in fact I'm going to show you how to do that rectangle effect because the fundamentals can be applied to everything that we're going to do today. So let's call this rectangle border hologram. This is a really long title, you don't have to make it this long, but this is what we're kind of creating. Now the first thing you're going to notice is this takes up the full composition, and that is fine. If yours doesn't, make it. Next, what I'm going to do is jump up here to this rectangle tool, making sure that my layer is selected. If it's not, this will just create a shape. So make sure the layer is selected down here in the timeline. Jump back up here to this shape tool. I'm going to go to rounded rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw a rounded rectangle, something like this. and happy days. Now I'm just going to select the layer again and hit V to bring back my cursor, move this to the middle, purely because I like to make sure it's in the center of the screen when I'm working on it. Now it's fine that we're making this bigger than what we maybe want it to be. In fact, I'm just going to hit S and scale it up slightly. It's fine that we're making this big because it's only a 720p composition, so we want it to be big so that the resolution doesn't look off later on if we scale it up or scale it down and what have you. Okay, hit U to get rid of all my layers there, or sub-layers. So we can see we've got our rectangle here. It's not looking very fancy at this point, and that's because I'm going to select the layer, hit M to bring up my mask. So this mask, this rectangle that we dragged over the top of our solid created a mask, which is what we're seeing right now. You can also see the outline is orange, and it's orange here too. What I'm going to do is select this mask, select this mask, hit Ctrl C, click off it, click the rectangle only, and hit Ctrl V. This is pasting a duplicate of that mask. I'm going to change the color of mask 2 so that we can see its difference. And I'm going to change it from add to subtract, and you're going to see what that does right now. Wow, there you go. We've created an invisible, strange looking line. Now the reason we're going to do this is if we drop down mask 2 options, we're going to expand downwards slightly, so -15. And you can see quickly now what we've created. We've created an outline of a rectangle, which is what we're going for. Now it's not looking very hologram-like or futuristic because it's all very rigid and solid sides. So what we're going to do is feather them. So we're going to go to mask feather and increase the mask feather. And already you can see this creates a more realistic looking, futuristic hologram effect. I'm not going to feather it that much, but I am going to feather it about there. And I can also bring back the expansion slightly too, to get something which I'm happy with. So so something maybe like that looks pretty cool. Again, be careful because too much it's going to be difficult to see on your live action plate, but let's go for that. Now I also like to have these edges slightly feathered too because this looks again too sharp, looks a little bit too video gamey. So I'm going to go into mask 1, that's the original mask, and I'm also going to feather the edges of that. And if I just turn off you can turn off these mask windows just by clicking this button here. We can see what's happening there. Now if it disappears too much, what we can also do here is increase our mask for our mask 1 and give ourselves some nicer borders. There you have it. Now that is, in its simplest form, the quickest way to create a hologram. Now you can imagine what we can do with this now. We can hit S to scale it, we can take it around, we can make duplicates of this, we could do Control D or Command D to duplicate them and move them around, we could have monitors next to each other, we could do all sorts of stuff. And that's why I was saying this is the most basic, the quickest thing to do. Now at this point, if you wanted to add some text, you just right click, go to New, Text, and find a nice font, which will be on the right hand side here. You can see I've got my character. If I just minimize these for a second. To minimize these tabs, you just click on them. So we've got this is text. I can change Korean news quite decent. You can also, if you could find a typewriter text or something like that, and then you just scale it up and then move it around. Now what I'd say is here, be careful not to click anywhere now because it'll just keep creating text boxes. But you can move this around just by clicking down here, hit V to bring back your selection tool, and then move it around. Now obviously the text stands out quite a lot because this is more faded, so I'd probably adjust the opacity slightly and match it all up. So that looks quite nice. And yeah, that's basically it. Now if I wanted to animate this text, or if you want to animate your text, the quickest way to do this is to go to your text right here, and next to it says animate. Click on the little play icon there and say I want this to fade in and out. I can go to opacity, because opacity is to actually fade it. And the one thing to be careful of here is that you've got to make sure that you are animating the opacity in Animator 1. The reason I mention this is because if you click on transform and scroll down, you're also going to get the opacity that we just changed a second ago, And these are slightly different. Well, they're completely different. So leave the transform opacity, but make sure you're altering the animation 1 opacity. And what we can do here is set an expression. So instead of, keyframing this by hand, what we can do is create a bit of an expression. So I'm going to hit Alt, click on the stopwatch, and possibly the most overused, thanks to Andrew Kramer, one of the most overused expressions that I use is the wiggle, open bracket, let's go 20, 100, close bracket. And what this is going to do is it's going to animate this text to shift around its opacity in a non-uniformed way, which is quite cool if you want to create like a glitching text effect. And you just slow these parameters down if you want to minimize that. So if I go on to say 10, 100, you'll see that it's a little bit different. Now you'll notice it's never going above 50, and that's because the transform value that we set for the actual layer will never go higher. If we increase this to 100, you'll notice that it does on there as well, but this is essentially setting the top floor of the opacity, and that expression won't ever go above that, so it'll never look like it's standing out too much, which is good. That's what I want. So so there you go. That's quite a complex way to animate non-linear. The other way to do this again is to, if you want to get rid of an expression, you just hold Alt and click again. That'll get rid of it. The other thing we could do is just animate this by hand, a little bit more hard, but who knows. So to do this, you click on the stopwatch just like you would if you're going to animate anything. And we're telling After Effects that at 0 we want this to start at 100. That's probably not the case. I'm just going to move that keyframe to, I don't know, in between the two, and then scale this keyframe down to 0, and you'll notice now that the keyframe goes from 0% to 100%. And what we could do then is select this keyframe, hit Control or Command C, go to 1 second, or just a little bit further across, then hit Command V, and then we're going to go 100 back to 0, and I can go Control C, and then move the timeline a little bit further, and Control V. Oh, click on that, Control C, Control V, there we go. And now we have a nice little hand animated 0 to 100 to 0 to 100. And if I wanted to duplicate this, I can select all these keyframes, hit Command C, move roughly the correct distance away, hit Command V, and just repeat that process. And yeah, I don't know why you'd want to do this over the other way, but I suppose the results are a lot more how you would expect. And if we wanted to make this go slower, because I'm lazy, I could just select all the keyframes, hold Alt, and click and drag to the end of the timeline, and that's just evenly spread those keyframes out, so I don't need to worry about doing anything there. There you go. So now I've just shown you 2 ways to keyframe, animate, and all the rest of it. So okay, so let's get on with this tutorial. So at this point, this is fine. This is good. This is all I want. Now you'll notice in my example, I added an image. To get that, I got that image. It's a royalty-free image from Pexels. I added a bit more text. I added a color shape, which again, similar, following the exact same kind of process that I created this. You can create more visuals if you want. Multiple rectangles rotated and all that kind of jazz creates some cool little graphics. Again, depending on what your scene is, this could be something you want to do. You might want to emulate a screen within a screen or something like that. Yeah, be creative with this. So I'm going to get rid of these 2 now because for this tutorial I'm going to do something slightly different. So I'm going to create a new solid, and where are we? Solid, make composition size. I'm going to call this circle. So before I created a rectangle, this is going to be a bit more futuristic. So I'm going to grab the ellipse tool, and now actually I'm going to go back on myself. So there's a really quick way to create perfect circles without measuring things out. So in my solid, I'm just going to make this width 700 and height 700, because obviously to create a circle we need an even box. Now if I double click the why did that do that? Solid 700 by 700, units. This is why square pixel, there we go. That's better. Okay, now I'm going to double click the circle and we've got a perfect circle. Mask. So if I went through that a little bit too fast, basically I chose square pixel because choosing HDTV still makes it slightly rectangular because it's creating the pixel out of the same sort of rectangular parameters that you can see here. Now what I'm going to do is exactly the same as I did before, so I'm going to Control C this mask and then Control V, change the colour just so we can see the difference, change it to subtract and create a lovely little border. Something like that. Maybe a bit thicker, actually. Yeah. Nice. Nice. Now, obviously at this point, if I was to animate this circle moving, you wouldn't really notice it was moving because it's a circle. So let's do something to this, which is just going to create some wedges. So something like... yeah, something like this. And I'm just going to subtract. Okay. Now, if I animate this, doing something like this, can you see that now we would notice that this is it's a circle? And earlier on I showed you the wiggle technique. I'm going to do that exact same thing. Before I do though, I'm just going to duplicate. Oh no, I'm going to do it now. Yeah, so I'm going to create Alt click on the stopwatch. I'm going to choose wiggle, open bracket 2, 360, close bracket. Okay, oh, a bit too fast. So let's wiggle, maybe change this to 180. So this will only wiggle within the 180 degrees field. Yeah, something like that. That looks cool. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is duplicate this. So I'm just going to change this white solid to circle. I thought I called it circle earlier. Never mind. I'm going to duplicate this circle. So to do that, I'm just going to press Command D or Control D. And as you can see, it looks the same. So I'm just going to hit S and I'm going to scale this one down slightly and hit M to bring up the masks. And I'm just going to make the expansion on this one a little bit less as well. So it's a bit thinner. And on this third mask here, I'm just going to move it over this side so it's completely, to the untrained eye, completely different. And we've got two circles now moving like so. And at this point I'm just going to duplicate it a few times, and you get the idea. We're just going to do this loads of different times, and you can make yours look more complex. I'm not, because I want this to go a little bit quicker. I want this tutorial to be fast. Wrong mask. So you can kind of see what I'm doing. It's all fun. All fun. So it should be noted at this point, I've completely forgotten to communicate to you, which is fine because I'm just kind of having fun here. But if ever you get confused with which circle you're on, this is another top tip. Just click on this little dot box next to it and it'll solo out your layer. It's a really quick way of kind of doing this. which you can see here. I don't know what I'm doing here. Wedge of cheese, who knows? Make that wedge of cheese a little bit better. Make sure it's gonna not stand out so much. Something like that. Yeah, cool. Okay, this is it. This is my hologram thing. And again, I could change the wiggle on a couple of them. So this one in the center, I could make this go a little bit quicker, or should I say slower, so that it looks different to the others. So to do that, I'm just gonna go wiggle 60, 20. Oh no, that looks a little bit stuttery. And I've got this strange imperfection happening, so I'm just going to move that out of the way. Yeah. Excellent news. Now at this point I'm going to rename these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No reason why, well, later on there'll be a reason why, you'll see. Okay, so I've created my cool looking hologram effect, and as it stands, that's fine. Now, to make this 3-dimensional and to pop out, because that's kind of what I want to go for, this kind of, I want these to look like, you know, this at the bottom and then these emerging above it, so it looks kind of cool. Now, the quickest way to do this is to check 3D to make all of these layers 3D, but at the moment we can't see them in 3D space because we don't have a camera, so I'm going to go to New and Camera, and yeah, I'm just going to click OK. And still nothing looks like it's changed, and that's because I need to create a viewer, another viewer. So I'm going to have 2 viewers. However, on this side viewer, I'm going to sort of give myself a bit more space so I can see this one. I'm going to change it to a left view, and now we can see the camera. And all of these on this peripheral line here are the layers, so again, you won't be able to see them at this point because they're not brought out. Now 1 needs to be a bit closer to the camera, so I'm going to move that to about there. 2 similarly needs to go a bit close to the camera, not too close, but a bit closer. And this is where when you're looking at it later on, you might find that you need to make more layers depending on what it looks like. So that's going to move there. 4. Here, and we're going to leave 5 where it is. So at this point, it doesn't look too different still when it's front on, and this is where the magic comes in. So now with this layer selected, and I'm just going to bring my viewer across a little bit more like this, if I hit C on my keyboard with my mouse hovering over this window, it's going to bring up my camera controls, and this will enable me to orbit, and you can see what moving those layers in 3D space has done. So now when we press play, they're all jumping off the screen a bit, looking much cooler, much more 3D. So just hit Ctrl Z there to bring it back to back flat. And yeah, right, what we're going to do now is pre-compose all of these layers, and I'm going to hit right click, go to pre-compose and move all attributes, and I'm going to call this cool. No, I'm not. I'm just going to call this circles hologram, and hit OK. And it looks like nothing has happened. At this point, you can also click this X up here to get rid of that second viewer. Now, if we are going to be working with those layers separated later on, we also need to, with this circles hologram, check this little star icon here, and this is going to enable any effects that we've created underneath to apply here as well. In fact, I need to move this camera across as well, so I'm just going to press Ctrl X and Ctrl V. So now again, if I get my orbital tool, these are orbiting in 3D. If I turn this this star off and I try to orbit, it won't allow me. It says it's in 2D, so if I was to make this layer 3D, it still looks flat. So that's why it's important to make sure that star is selected, and this is going to enable any effects that you made underneath work as well. Okay, right, moving on.